The information provided is not a substitute for legal and other professional advice where the facts and circumstances warrant. People should always consult their own legal or other professional advisors and discuss the facts and circumstances that apply to their specific circumstances. The information shared on Ask the Landlord is for educational purposes only.
Hey there! We're back with another episode of Ask the Landlord with our favorite landlord, Albert Dweck. I'm Melissa. I'm one of Albert's producers and a former New York City, Pittsburgh, Lafayette, Louisiana, and Washington, D.C. renter. And together, we're going to be asking this landlord some questions. And if you have a question for Albert, leave us a voicemail on the Ask the Landlord Hotline. That number is 646-580-3015. And this week, Albert, we got our first voicemail. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right. This week, our question comes from Jim in Greenpoint on the Ask the Landlord hotline.
Yeah, hi, this is Jim in Greenpoint. Love the show, Albert. I have a friend who's a landlord. I'm not one, but I have a question from his perspective and your perspective as a landlord. Squatters, what do you do with them? And what are the steps you have to take when there's someone in the building who won't leave? I had a buddy of mine, had to deal with it. How would you do it? And what are the protocols, I guess? Thanks for informing all of us tenants about what you do, and appreciate the show.
Well, thank you, Jim. And that's a great question. Like many of the questions and topics we deal with, it's important to define what's going on, how these things happened, etc. So I have experience with this, and I imagine other people do as well. And I'm not an expert in landlord-tenant law, although I'm obviously very familiar with having dealt with it over the years. So let's just paint the picture, a hypothetical picture first, and I think it'll help us sort of understand. So basically, let's say that you're a landlord or tenant, whatever, and you have a unit in your building that is vacant, right? And then someone moves into that unit or tries to take possession of that unit, right? So Melissa, that's the question, right?
I think so.
Obviously there's different parts of it. If someone is supposed to leave and doesn't leave, that's a different question for a minute,
right.
Which we'll come back to. We'll come back to after.
So define squatting.
So squatting is someone. So I mean, we can look it up, but a squatter, for the way I understand it, is someone who's not supposed to be living somewhere. Someone who's not supposed to be living somewhere and lives there, right? So now you say, well, so the context in which I understand that is, well, let's say I have a vacant apartment and someone moved into it, or is living there without paying, unauthorized occupant. Okay. So very difficult question, obviously, to deal with. So in the first part, right, you have to realize that, let's say you have a house and you're a landlord that's vacant and someone breaks into it and starts living there. That's happens.
Oh boy.
That happens to people, right? So first of all, you have to make sure that doesn't happen, because there are desperate people out there that need housing and they're looking for whatever way they can survive, and sometimes that necessitates people breaking into vacant buildings that shouldn't have people in them, or places that shouldn't have people, whatever. So, and that, it's breaking and entering, right? Like someone shouldn't be living in a place they're not supposed to be. You shouldn't be taking space that you're not supposed to have, that belongs to someone else.
Of course.
So I understand in New York and other places, from my experience, that obviously if that happens, it's important to deal with it right away, because then the law, the authorities can get involved right away. The reason why I'm saying right away is because I think the timing does matter.
Okay.
Because once you cross a certain number of days, and this is, I know as I'm saying it, I'm about to say it, it's scary, is once the person who's squatting goes past a certain number of days, they're considered like an occupant of the property.
Even if they trespassed, broke in, and they're there illegally, that's the rule. Is that nationwide? Do you know?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know, but what I know is that what I've heard and experienced is that if someone does that for more than 30 days,
Hmm.
uh, squatters' rights, New York City. Let's just look.
I've seen this on Airbnbs where people will have someone staying in their Airbnb and they just won't leave, and then they will stay 30 days, and then that I think can translate into squatters' rights,
That's right.
which is crazy.
That's
Like
right.
that's a wild
That's right.
thing.
So squatters in the state of New York have rights, albeit not the same rights as tenants who have acquired an apartment or home legally.
Mhm.
I'm reading this. New York squatters law allows homeless people and anyone else who attempts to establish residence on someone else's property limited rights that will help them avoid a trespassing charge. In addition, squatters help their case to remain on the property, maintain it while they are living there. Squatters can also avoid a trespassing charge if they can provide that they inhabited the property due to an emergency.
Mm. Does it define the emergency?
Squatters are more than people who live in a property without the owner's permission. Squatting can also happen accidentally. Possible scenarios in which a person can be deemed a squatter. This is good. Include breaking into an abandoned house or foreclosure and living there. We discussed that. Remaining in a house or apartment after the lease has expired or after you've been evicted, and making someone else's place your own by illegal encroachment. Some people equate trespassing to squatting. This is not the case, although both can be illegal. In the state of New York, anyone who lives on a property for 30 days or more becomes a legal tenant.
Like without paying?
Therefore, eviction becomes critical prior to the 30-day period. What often happens is that squatters and trespassers can falsely claim a right to reside on a property. They forge documents to make it appear as if they're legal tenants to the property and buy some time so that they could take full advantage of squatters' rights in New York City. So obviously, New York City eviction is fairly complicated, it says, and lengthy. So you'll want to avoid it if at all possible. If you're inexperienced in real estate, work with a property manager, professional real estate agent to evict the squatter. A 10-day notice, you can send this notice to someone who lived on the property for less than 30 days. In the notice, you'll need to notify the squatter they have 10 days to vacate the property, along with the reason they must do so. If a squatter does not leave the property after 10 days, you can file suit against them. A 14-day notice, there's a 14-day notice. That's required, is considered the notice period for evicting someone. In this notice, you inform the tenant they should pay the entire amount of rental due or quit the property in 14 days. And this usually works when a person is an old tenant living in a property after the termination of a lease. In such situation, you can charge them rent after the notice expires. You'll send this notice, the 30-day squatter's notice. You'll send this notice when the squatter has been living in the property for more than 30 days and now considered a legal tenant of the property.
So, can you go over the steps? Like, I understand it's saying after you have 10 days, but then when do you get law enforcement? Like, are
Right
police
away.
involved?
Right away.
So, right away, the landlord would call the police or whatever law enforcement, and they would physically go to that property. Is that how it would play out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's unbelievable.
It's an unfortunate situation that landlords have to deal with and that people are, doing
You have to use
this.
the
Right.
police or the court system.
The court system. And are police responsive to this? Do you know what I mean by
Yeah.
that?
So what I've found, and
Mhm.
I've had this,
Mhm.
the 30-day thing is really a big deal.
Mhm.
So it's important to, from a property manager / owner perspective, you have to visit the properties more often than 30 days so that and also make sure that you don't have squatters, because the 30-day thing is a real problem,
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, squatters. So what happens when you call the police is the police will see right away if someone broke into the property, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they'll usually be helpful as a second line of defense. In the first line of defense is obviously keeping the place boarded up, and that if you have someone that broke in, you should call right away. So the police. Then when the police show up, let's say the squatter doesn't have any paperwork and clearly broke into the property, the police should do something to remove or arrest the person, right? However, with the squatter, if squatter produces a lease or some argument that's coherent,
Mm-hmm.
what are the police going to do?
Right. How do they know?
How do they know?
Right. Who's right?
So that's where, you're a police officer, someone produces a document, you don't know anything, you're not the judge and the jury in this
Mm-hmm.
situation, so you're leaving it to the police officer who's an enforcement person to make a judgment. It's not their purview.
Mm-hmm.
So
So then what happens?
right. So then, obviously then it becomes like what happens then the police kick it to, back to the court where you have to get legal representation to handle that.
Which I can imagine will take longer than, those 10 days and could stretch to that 30-day limit, which is scary.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So really scary, like scary in a way that's why you have to secure your property.
Secure property, how so?
We talked in the past about like let's say we talked in the past about, and I remember there were commercials when we were kids, like don't play around construction sites, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes, you have a construction site and, you have people coming in at night or whatever, or and living there, or doing whatever they have to do to live there temporarily, and it's dangerous. Like it's dangerous because it's not made for people to be hanging out, in a construction site for whatever reason, or the building is not ready for human habitation, right? For whatever reason, like it's an office building, someone could squat in an office building, right? Also, or a warehouse, and you're like, that's not safe. I mean, you have to make sure that people that you're doing as a landlord, property owner, you're securing the property so that you're keeping it safe so people don't go into a dangerous situation, right? And now you have desperate people that need to just survive, and they'll do whatever they have to do to survive. And it's like, I get that. And, if you make it easy, people may take advantage of that. But you have to show that you're going to do something about that. And, having law enforcement available, having the place secured, responding to it right away, having the person removed if they're trespassing is really important. But then if a person's sophisticated to establish what's trespassing, is once you get, then you're going to have to move to court with this person. It's really both criminal and civil. It's really really complicated, and it's a great question that Jim brought up, and I hope what we highlighted today works. That 30-day rule, super important. The keeping an eye on your property for that reason and securing it, super important. Keeping it safe for your people and other people is very important. The other thing is, look, you're dealing with people that are desperate, and just throwing a person back out on the street is also hard. So I think that, it's an emergency if that happens, right? Someone's coming and staying there. So, being thoughtful about where the person's going to go, where you're going to send them to is also important. Like, so I think being most effective in getting rid of a squatter or a person that trespasses on your property, and they're not interchangeable, is to, have some suggestions or places that the person can go.
That's
be it a
very, yeah.
shelter nearby or some temporary emergency housing or whatever it is. You're also, if you have that ready for the police, that would be something to be aware of also. And, confronting people is dangerous, and you shouldn't do this by yourself. I
Right.
think
Use the,
people, yeah, I mean, you're in your place, maybe, we've seen this on television, like you're going on vacation and then someone moves into your house and it's like, that's crazy. I mean, it happens, it happens. So you're like, that's, and what, you're going to come home and what if the person, wants to protect and has a gun or whatever? I'm like, scary. So what are you doing about that? So you really got to think that through. Um, and I think thinking about and being prepared in a way that you're going to deal with this by getting professional help, by getting law enforcement involved, by seeking guidance from people that can help these people as well is so important to go and have in your toolbox in a way to help deal with the situation. So I hope that was helpful. What I read online just now to you corroborates some of the experience that I have. I've had such situations where people moved into my properties and stayed there, demanded that they be able to stay. And then
wow.
I actually had to make a deal with them to evict them, buy them out because it was expedient to get rid of them. It wasn't necessarily like in one way you say someone moved into my property and was living there for a year. It happened in COVID
Wow.
a lot, but someone was living to my property and I didn't, and and they weren't paying rent, but then they said, no, I can stay here. And they were right.
Wow.
So I actually
the
had to make
time-
a deal to evict them. Like, not a deal. What I ended up doing was offering them money to leave.
It's like a severance package.
It is.
That's wow. I'm sure you have tons more stories about this, but I think, Jim, I hope we answered your question. I think that was a really informative topic we haven't really discussed on Ask the Landlord.
Great
So thank
question.
you.
Sensitive.
Yeah.
Great question. Really, really hard. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Albert. And if you have a question for Albert like Jim, leave us a voicemail on the Ask the Landlord hotline. That number is 646-580-3015. You can ask any question you want. Thanks, Albert.
Thank you.
For more episodes, please subscribe to Ask the Landlord on your favorite podcast platform. We'd appreciate it if you left a review on Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to watch the show, check out our Ask the Landlord YouTube channel. If you have a question for Albert, feel free to contact him on Instagram at Ask the Landlord and check out his TikTok at Ask the Landlord. Bridging the gap between landlords and tenants, this has been Ask the Landlord. Thanks for listening.